And now we can perhaps collect our thoughts by a quotation from the Secret Doctrine, the introductory. Over there we read, "The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations the world over." The Secret Doctrine further tells us that this wisdom religion was once universal and known to the initiates and in fact the people of all nations in antiquity. It is this wisdom that is the roots whence have sprung all the religions and philosophies that we know of in the modern and ancient worlds. And evidence of this universality is to be found in the myths and symbols of all the religions, their common basis being indicating their common origin. Much of HBB's writings have been devoted to this study of symbolism, and in the few lectures that we have had during this conference session have also brought out this idea. Now, I want to draw your attention particularly to a certain branch of what may be called the mysteries, and that is the Masonic traditions that have seemingly always existed with humanity. It is a peculiar system having its own symbology, its own ritual way of working, and clearly it is also a vehicle of the transmitting of the ancient wisdom to the world. It is a fraternity devoted to the high objective of brotherhood, of humanity, based on a growing knowledge of the essential oneness of the spirit as the root of all human beings and of all life for that matter. It inculcates in its members the highest moral and ethical values and the desire for self-improvement and self-perfection, character building, amongst other things. It is a secret fraternity, and we will shortly see the reasons why in the post-Atlantean period it was felt that there should be need for secrecy in the mysteries. And it also works in degrees, bringing us the idea that the wisdom must be imparted slowly and only to those who deserve it, so that there were also very strict probations that went along with these degrees. Students of this very, very interesting subject have often wondered and speculated about its origins, and there is a vast literature on the subject. And they often find that worldwide, amongst, in fact, all the nations, sometimes amongst very primitive people, traces, perhaps signs, symbols, myths of some sort that indicate this affinity and indicate that these people, themselves remnants of far ancient civilizations and ancient nations, also once possessed the similar mysteries. Now, on a subject like this, there is not very much that can be said, and I'm going to leave it more to your intuitions to detect, because I'm now going to talk about the religious traditions of Arabia, and as explicitly as I can, and then leave it to you to try to discern as much as you can of these ancient mysteries. The religious tradition of Arabia is called Islam, And one Western dictionary that I consulted, the Concise Oxford Dictionary, defines it as the religion of Muslims, revealed through Muhammad, the Prophet of Allah. Also, it could mean the Muslim world. The said dictionary further explains the etymological derivation of the word from the Arabic meaning to submit. Literally, submission to the will of God, to submit. Now, this definition is typical for the Western world, who assumes that Islam is a religion that commenced with Muhammad. And as a first step, I would like to rectify this not very correct assumption. It is supposed that Muhammad is the founder of this religion. The fact is that Muslims themselves do not consider the Prophet Muhammad as either the originator or the founder of Islam. It is the understanding of Muslims, more particularly Arabs, but now this may be applied to a much wider area of the world. It is their understanding that Islam is an everlasting and an unchanging truth, a tradition that has been taught to men by a long line of prophets, of whom Adam is considered to be the first and Muhammad the last. The underlying idea to this concept is similar to the Indian concept of the Sanatana Dharma, a continuing Dharma or Deen, as it is more accurately called in Arabic. The Quran, which is believed by Muslims to be the inspired utterance of Muhammad, is understood to be a restatement of this ancient religion taught by all the preceding prophets who have through the ages appeared to every nation of the world. Now, I'll just elaborate that idea for a few moments before going on. And when I am giving you Quranic quotations, it is not with a sense that it has any authority, but because I think it does accurately reflect the tradition of the nation and the people. So, at its very commencement, the Quran lays down in clear words, I'm quoting, "This book is a guide to those who believe in that which has been revealed to thee," the thee is Muhammad, it's being addressed to him, "and that which was revealed before thee." The universality of the teaching is emphasized in the following verses also. I'm quoting two verses. "And there is not a people, but a warner has gone amongst them." And then another, "And every nation had a messenger." This indicating the continuity of this prophetic tradition. Lest anyone should be misled by the names of the few of the prophets mentioned in the Quran, and they are mainly the Old Testament prophets that I mentioned, it is stated, "And certainly we have sent prophets before thee. There are some of them that we have mentioned to thee, and there are others whom we have not mentioned to thee." There is an oral tradition widely accepted by Muslims that there have been 124,000 prophets. Of course, this number need not be taken literally. There might be a numerological basis for that number, but these numerous prophets who have appeared in every nation and in every age make Islam, if correctly understood and interpreted, very inclusive. The Arabic word Nabi is the appellation used for those several prophets. The same word is to be found in the Hebrew and in other Semitic languages, and is used in the same way, and more accurately, correctly, it should be translated a seer. It is derived from the Chaldean word Nebo, who is the god of the secret wisdom, Nebo. And this is identical with the Roman Mercury, the Greek Hermes, the Egyptian Thoth, and the Sanskrit Buddha. I'm not referring to the Lord Buddha, but the planet Mercury, which is also called Buddha, which is why Wednesday we call Budvar, the day of Mercury or the day of Budh. Esoterically, it implies an initiate or an adept of the secret wisdom. So a Nabi is an initiate or an adept of the secret wisdom. Now, in any study dealing with the religious lore of the nations, the student should keep in mind that such traditions belong to a special category of literature which has been called the sacred language. The distinguishing characteristic of this kind of tradition is that whilst its narratives have some historical basis, it is largely but not entirely allegorical. It is constructed of symbols and allegories containing profound spiritual truths. These symbols and allegories are also referred to sometimes as the mystery language, which is said to have been invented in ancient days, in the ancient mysteries, in order both to reveal to those who can be helped and to conceal from those who could not be helped spiritual knowledge and the power which its possession bestows. I have read somewhere, and I believe it to be my own understanding, that it was after the Atlantean crisis that the mystery schools as we know them were established, with secrecy, with degrees, with probations, all designed for the purpose that only those who truly deserved would find the knowledge that gave power, and also that this knowledge would never again be misused as had happened in the earlier days. HBB tells us there are 7 keys to the interpretation and understanding of the mystery language, each key bestowing an insight into the underlying truth. She also tells us that this mystery language was universal, and it was the same with the initiates of all nations, as indeed it still is. Hence the common symbology to be found in the religious lore and traditions of all the nations. Now, I am going to lead you into the subject I have chosen, and the purpose of this would be, in recounting for you the religious traditions of Arabia and of Islam, to see whether we can discern and discover vestiges of these ancient mysteries, particularly of that branch which we call Masonic. The Arabians are a very ancient race and have seen the rise and fall of their civilizations, as have all races. Now I'm going to make a reference to Jeffrey Hodgson's lecture notes, for me a favorite reference book, where he describes the second subrace of the Aryan root race as the Arabian. And he says the second subrace is the Arabian, and he says that about 35,000 BC, whilst the third divine dynasty was ruling in Egypt, the second subrace of the Aryan race had spread westward and extended its dominion over Arabia and later on over the whole of Africa except Egypt, where the divine dynasties were still reigning, and over Mesopotamia and the whole of Persia. Then following this, there are chronological charts which read as follows. About 80,000 BC, he says, the Semite nucleus settled in Arabia. From this we gather that the Arabian race and the term Semite is being used synonymously, Semitic. And he says at 40,000 BC, the Arabian race ruled Africa, Mesopotamia, and Persia, except Egypt. That was a repetition. Now, this I'm quoting to you to try to now put a date to the origins of what I am trying to explain to you as we go along, trying to date it. And to further try to get some idea of the antiquity of the tradition, I found in volume 5 of the Adyar edition of the Secret Doctrine on page 197, a reference that also gives us a clue to the antiquity and origin of the Arabian race and the Arabian language. Now, I'm going to quote to you, like many an HPB sentence, it's a little hard to read because it goes on for quite some time, but I'm going to give it to you. The compilers of the Old Testament, as it exists in the Hebrew canon, knew well that the language of the initiates in the days of Moses was identical with that of the Egyptian hierophants, and that none of the dialects that had sprung from the old Syriac and the pure old Arabic of Yarab, the father and progenitor of the primitive Arabians, long before the time of Abraham, in whose days the ancient Arabic had already become vitiated, that none of those languages was the one sacerdotal universal tongue. Nevertheless, all of them included a number of words which could be traced to common roots. Now, this quotation gives us some points, and that is, in the time of Abraham, the race and the language was already vitiated with age, so to say, and she names one Yarab, a name I never encountered anywhere else, excepting in the Secret Doctrine, as the progenitor of this race that came, the Semitic nucleus, which we consider to be the second root race that settled in Arabia. Now, since we have talked about Abraham, I want to introduce some ideas about this, because much of what I'm going to say will center around this. I don't know whether we can call it a personality here. We must now apply HPB's sevenfold keys. Partly historical, definitely allegorical. It could mean many things, whether you're looking at it from an astrological point of view or whatever. We will take one clue here before we go on reading, and that is, there is a letter that HBB wrote, I forget now to whom, when she was writing the Secret Doctrine, in which she shows the phenomenal way in which she was being taught at the time of reading, and how she was shown this, what she had to write in the astral light. And she says in this particular letter how she was made to see the list of the patriarchs in conjunction with the rishis, and how she was made to understand that they were representations of the races and that had existed in the past and of which she was writing. So I think we must also apply this hint when we are considering a personality. So with this background, we'll go on. Now, the dominating figure, and I mean that very literally, in the Arabian traditions is Abraham. Besides being a Nabi, a prophet or a seer, he is the patriarch, the father, and the progenitor of their race, a sort of Manu figure. All the numerous tribes of Arabia claim descent from him through Ishmael. I am intentionally using the pronunciations from the Anglican Old Testament as being more familiar to you. The firstborn son of Abraham, and he is throughout Arabia called Khalilullah, the friend of God. His alleged tomb at Hebron in Palestine is therefore popularly known amongst the Arabs and the Palestinians as Al-Khalil, that means the friend, a word derived from his title as the friend of God. Now, I would like to introduce a certain word to you in relation to the patriarch Abraham. He is preeminently a Hanif. This is best translated as a righteous one or an upright one. It's an important concept, and we will go into this for a while. The term implies a member of an enduring fraternity of Hanifs. There is a long succession of these upright ones. And the existence through the ages of a number of Hanifs is acknowledged. And popularly, Muhammad is likewise considered to be a Hanif, or an upright one, a member of this fraternity of upright ones, or righteous ones. The people of the West who know Abraham only through the Old Testament and the Judeo-Christian tradition are often amazed that the Arabian people have their own and different perception of the same patriarchal figure. As was stated earlier, the Arabian tribes claim descent from Abraham through his firstborn son Ishmael and from his wife Hagar. Again, I'm giving the Anglican pronunciations. But this tradition differs from the biblical version in that Ishmael and Hagar are not given a somewhat inferior position as described in the Bible, which story in favor of Isaac and Sarah is considered to be a partisan distortment. In the Arabian tradition, which is repeated in the Quran, it is Ishmael that figures in Abraham's great test. And it is not Isaac that figures in that test. And it is Abraham's wholehearted and willing submission to his test that more than anything else makes him one submitting to God, that is, a Muslim, from which the word Islam is to be derived. Significantly, this great sacrifice, or its anniversary, is commemorated by the Arabs and by the Muslims generally as their highest festival in the Islamic calendar of festivals. The festival of Abraham's sacrifice is the highest festival. It is not a festival amongst the Jews. I mention this only to show the great emphasis that has been put. At present, I am now expounding this idea, trying to build up the idea of Abraham before we go on to see how he built the house of God. It was stated earlier that all the Nabis or prophets from Adam to Muhammad taught Islam and were accordingly Muslims, inasmuch as this idea of submission. Islam is therefore very much the religion of Abraham, and he was a Muslim. This is the way Muslims perceive it. That is why I'm trying to put it to you. And I now give you 5 Quranic quotations. Again, as I said, not with any sense of authority, but to convey to you the tradition, the way the Muslims see it. Here's the first. And they say, be Jews or Christians, and you will be on the right course. Say, nay, be of the religion of Abraham, the upright one. This is a Quranic injunction. I'll give you another one on the same lines. And who has a better religion than he who submits himself entirely to God, and he is the doer of good to others, and follows the faith of Abraham, the Hanif, or the upright one. Third, say, surely my Lord has guided me to the right path, to the most right religion, the faith of Abraham, the upright one. Fourth, Abraham was not a Jew nor a Christian, but he was an upright man, a Muslim, meaning one submitting to God. This obviously, the mention of the Jews and the Christians has a historical reference, I suppose, to the times in which these words were stated. Lastly, say, God has spoken the truth, therefore follow the religion of Abraham, the upright one. Now this should sufficiently, I think, take you back to the Abrahamic origin of this tradition. Actually, it's even older because it goes back to Adam. Now, I have given you 2 titles of the patriarch Abraham. I said he was a Hanif, an upright one or a righteous one. He was a Muslim, meaning one submitting to the will of God. This title coming to him preeminently from his test and his submission to the test. Now I'm going to introduce the third of his titles. He was an Amir, or a builder. And he built the Baytullah, or the house of God. And this is the cubic temple, or the Kaaba, of which I've put up pictures to show you. Now before we go on, I'm going to digress a bit from thoughts that came to me when I witnessed the round table, and I'll explain you how these thoughts came to me. When we are considering the Masonic traditions, as I'm trying to show you now, as Abraham the builder, we must remember that there are many forms or rites in which the wisdom has been transmitted. The ones we are considering, and perhaps the ones that may be commonly known to the Western world, belong to the second root race, or taking the forms from that. They are of Semitic origin. There are others. There were the Mitraic mysteries. We were recently talking amongst ourselves about the Celtic mysteries in Gaul, and how Julius Caesar, the Romans, and later the Church completely destroyed all vestiges of these mysteries. So let us be always clear that there are many transmissions through the races, through the sub-races. The West is generally familiar with the idea of the building of the Temple of Solomon, a great and magnificent concept. There are older ones, even in the Semitic tradition. For example, there is a system, the Mosaic system, if I might so call it, the building of the Ark of the Covenant, or the tabernacle in the wilderness. And there is this yet more ancient rite, the building of the temple by Abraham. Now, when we consider this, let us also recall this very mysterious figure that is associated with Abraham, Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, and references in the New Testament to this figure, I don't know what other word I could use, refer to the Christ as the high priest forever of the order of Melchizedek. Now, in these old rites, first of all, two things will become clear. There is always the prophet and the high priest. There was Moses and there was Aaron. They are the initiators, and I'll tell you how this digression came about. This is not in my notes. I said that I witnessed it from the round table that I witnessed. You'll find in all initiation, there are always the two who present the candidate for initiation. There are reflections of this in many rituals. If you look upon the Anglican Church, the coronation ritual, it is the two bishops that conduct the coronation rite. And I mention this because I was called away and didn't see the end of that initiation, but I believe a squire was being raised to a knight, and I saw her being led, flanked by perhaps two knights, and that again called to mind the two initiators, the prophet and the high priest. For our sister Manize, I will mention, this will not be familiar to some of you. In most Parsi Zoroastrian homes in India, you will find a picture. It's a sort of a triptych. There are three sections to this picture. In the central panel, there is the fire urn on which the eternal and sacred fire burns. Then on one side, facing the fire and tending it, is the prophet Zarathustra. And on the other side, also facing it and tending the fire, is the high priest Neryo Sang. So here again you have the prophet and the high priest. We are reminded that King Solomon was Zadok the high priest and Nathan the prophet, anointed Solomon king. Now if you look upon this in many ways, but if you look upon it purely using the biological key, these are the pituitary and the pineal glands. And this is a very advanced initiation. The final mystery takes place in the Holy of Holies, and that is said in relation to the chakras to be entirely within the cerebral system, above the neck chakra. And much can be said about it, but eventually it is said, as the process proceeds, a golden oil is exuded, and perhaps this is what has given rise to the idea. And the uppermost chakra is also invoked in the process, but this has probably given idea to the concept of the anointed, because henceforward that man is a Christ. After he has passed this initiation, he is an anointed one. So we'll now come back to my notes, and I'm now going to tell you about the building of the house of God and about the Abrahamic tradition. You have Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac as the triad that is the basis for the building of this house, the Atma Buni Banas, if you like. Man and the universe are built on the same models. Cosmologically, the universe is the house of God, or the temple of God, if you want to use that word, as is in truly man, likewise, the house of God. Now, I'll revert to my notes. From time immemorial, Makkah was a center of the religious life of Arabia. The city grew around the Kaaba, the sacred cubic temple. The word Kaaba means a cube, as you can see it. The sacred cubic temple, which, as tradition said, was built by Abraham, assisted by Ishmael and Ishaq, his sons. Pilgrims came to the Kaaba from all over Arabia, adding to the wealth of the city and making it an important commercial and political center. Now, again, I'm quoting the Quran in the same sense as I mentioned to you, to convey to you a tradition. The Quran makes one reference to the city, but in doing so calls it Bakka, with a B, which is probably an old form of the name. The etymology of this word is uncertain. This is the quotation. Surely the first house appointed for men is the one at Bakka, blessed and a guidance for the nations. Now, I'm giving you the Quranic traditions about the building. It is held that it was built by Abraham and his sons. More correctly, it was rebuilt, and I'll explain that. This tradition is repeated in the following verses, and for your interest, I'm going to give them to you. I'm giving you one or two of these verses. And when Abraham and Ishmael raised the foundations of the house, they prayed, Our Lord, accept from us, surely thou art hearing the knowing. There is another quotation. And when we made the house a resort for men and a place of security, and we enjoined Abraham and Ishmael, saying, Purify my house for those who visit it, and those who abide in it for devotion, and those who bow down and those who prostrate themselves. Now, tradition gives the Kaaba an older history. Its origins are not with Abraham, they go further. The original or the archetypal temple is in heaven, and it is eternally in heaven. And when Adam fell from his heavenly home to earth, he was given the plans and the proportions of this heavenly temple, which he then built on earth. In this, he was assisted by his son Seth. So, Adam, in fact, was the first of the Amirs, or builders. Here, clearly, I think we must look upon the races and their respective continents and civilizations that they built in this reference to Adam building the house. But the common people literally believe that the heavenly Kaaba is directly above in the sky, above this one, and as they believe that the angels perpetually circumambulate it. But we know what the archetypal worlds mean, and we can now see how this descent of the wisdom and of man is taking place. Eventually, the Adamic temple was destroyed in the flood, and it is this that was subsequently rebuilt at the same site and in accordance with the same plans and proportions by Abraham, assisted by his sons. Now, pointing to its great antiquity, the Quran refers to the Kaaba as the first house. It has also been called the ancient house in 2 other verses. That the Kaaba antedated Abraham is evident from the verse in which Abraham is made to state, "O our Lord, I have settled a part of my offspring," that is, descendants of Ishmael, "near thy sacred house, that they may keep up prayer." The Kaaba is popularly referred to as the Baytullah, or the house of God. Bayt, house. You will recognize it from the Hebrew Beth El, which also means house of God, or Bethlehem, So, but the word Baytullah doesn't occur in the Quran, and other words occur, and these words are traditional. It is, first of all, the cube, the Kaaba. It is the house, or this house, or my house. It is the first house, the ancient house, the sacred house. And then there is another reference, it's called the Sacred Mosque. Here the word mosque, translated from the Arabic, is masjid, which literally means a place of doing sajda, or a place of prostration. And more correctly, it refers to the entire enclosure in which the Kaaba stands, rather than to the Kaaba itself, or to the cube itself. Now I'm giving you some of the traditions. The Kaaba is the Qibla for Muslims. The Qibla means it is the direction in which they pray. So that worldwide everyone turns to the Kaaba, and I believe nowadays there are even watches that you can buy that give you the direction. And this creates concentric circles of people at prayer that surrounds the Kaaba and therefore extends worldwide. In the quotation I use to support this tradition is, "And from whatsoever place thou comest forth, turn thy face towards the Sacred Mosque, and wherever you are, turn your face towards it." Now let us look upon the symbology, because very much more can't be stated openly by me, but I will expect you to intuit and recognize. Temple. Its base is a square. Every face of it shows a square. And every angle in it is likewise a square. The sum of the angles in each face is 360 degrees, which is the sum of the degrees in the circle. And I think there is a subtle reference in this to the philosophical, speculative idea of the squaring of the circle. Also, at each of the angular conjunctions, you get 360 degrees, because 4 90 degrees angle conjoined there. So you get 360 degrees again. I'll give you a little description about it. It has only one entrance, which is raised 7 feet from the ground level. And portable stairs being used to enter. It is entered only once a year, and that is only by the highest dignitaries of the city and the country, and on occasion also visiting state dignitaries. You have to be a very important person to have that privilege of entering, and it's once a year only, and on this occasion it is just washed with rose water and it is censed. The interior contains nothing excepting 3 pillars. and the interior walls, very noticeable on the stones, are certain mason's marks. Now, embedded in the eastern corner is that famous black stone called the Hajr Aswad, the black stone, which has been venerated since ancient times. And I think as far as I know, the origin of this veneration is not very clear. And it is kissed or touched by pilgrims during the circumambulation, provided the pilgrim can get to it. The throng is so great. Tradition says it came from heaven, it fell from heaven, so most likely it's a meteorite. I've seen it and touched it, and first of all I must say it's not black. And it's very unusual. It's sort of a brownish, yellowish black color. Most probably a meteorite of some sort. Now this is interesting. In front of the facade of the cube is considered that one which has the door. At some short distance before the facade, which contains the entrance, is what is called the Maqam-e-Ibrahim, or the place of Abraham. It is the seat or the chair from which the patriarch presided at the building of the temple. And there is a relic preserved at the site. It is a stone slab said to have the impressions of Abraham's feet. The seat of Abraham is there in front. The Quran gives this memorial, the seat of Abraham, a special significance, and the two following verses illustrate it. Again, I repeat, the traditions give it a special importance, because I say I'm using the Quran only as a way of telling you what the traditions are. The first verse says, and take the place of Abraham as a place of prayer. The second verse says, and in it, that is in the house, are clear signs, meaning landmarks. The foremost of which is the place of Abraham, the standing place of Abraham, and whoever enters it shall be secure. Not far from the vicinity of the seat of or standing place of Abraham is a sacred spring or well, and it is called the Spring of Zamzam. Tradition says that the spring sprang forth at the prayer of Hagar to succor her thirsty son Ishmael. It has given a plentiful supply of water as long as people can recall. And the water from this well of Zamzam is carried away as being something, by pilgrims as being something sacred. It's considered blessed. Now, there is one reference to this well of Zamzam in the Secret Doctrine, you may be surprised. And it is again in page 181 of volume 5. It's rather obscure, but the Samsam of the Sabians is also a Kabbalah, meaning a wisdom tradition, as is the Arabic Zamzam, or the well of wisdom. So clearly this stream of water represents in some way the living waters of truth. Now, a short distance beyond the well of Zamzam and facing the facade, that means in front of the temple, are two hills. And these are known as Safa and Marwa. These two hills are considered to be amongst the sacred landmarks of the temple. And this tradition is repeated in the Quranic verse. The Safa and the Marwa are amongst the signs of God. Now, there are two sorts of pilgrimages. And I think when we are talking of a pilgrimage, we have in mind Gavin's journey, the path that humanity treads from his first beginnings to his distant goals. There are two forms of this pilgrimage. There is the greater and the lesser. The greater, or the Hajj, which I'm sure you have become familiar with, can be performed only on one day in the year. And this day is the anniversary of the commemoration of Abraham's sacrifice, which is the 10th day of the 12th month. On all other occasions, the pilgrimage is a visit, or the Umrah. It is not the Hajj. And that can be performed on any other day of the year. A vast area surrounding the city of Makkah is considered sacred and a place of sanctuary. Within this area, no man may carry weapons. You cannot hunt. You cannot kill anything. You cannot fell trees. You cannot cut grass. There is absolute sanctuary within this precinct. On the various approaches to the city, signposts indicate the commencement of the sacred area. And these points are called the miqat. And at these points, the pilgrim must change his garb to and don what is called the Aram. Now, let me describe that to you. It consists of two pieces of unstitched cloth, usually white, one worn around the waist, the other around the torso in such a way that it covers the left shoulder but leaves the right shoulder bare. In the state of Aram, the pilgrim observes celibacy, and there are certain other restrictions, cannot carry metals, till his pilgrimage is completed, when he may remove the Aram for regular clothing, foremost of which is a 7-fold circumambulation of the Kaaba, or the cube. Esotericists see in this rite the 7 rounds in human evolution. The circumambulation is performed anti-clockwise. I don't know why. Then this is to be followed by a 7-fold ambulation between the 2 hills that I mentioned to you, starting at Safa and ending at Marwa. This 7-fold ambulation between the 2 hills might indicate the 7 races of development within each of the 7 rounds. Some who have this knowledge look upon it that way. The masses don't have very deep insights into the rituals or the symbols or anything. They just have a very literal understanding of these things. During the Hajj, this chant is repetitively intoned by no less than 2 million people in unison as they approach the house of God. And those who have witnessed it say that it sounds like thunder, the way it rolls about. Now, something sad. The pilgrimage is greatly marred by the practice of animal sacrifice. And I think it is a literal and unintuitive interpretation of Abraham's sacrifice which it commemorates, and also an anthropomorphic conception of the deity that is at the root of this very unwise practice. And unquestionably, karma will in time remove it by very drastic means, I'm sure. Now, I'm going to close with 2 quotations from John Yarker's book entitled The Arcane Schools, the subtitle of which is A Review of Their Origin and Antiquity, with a general history of Freemasonry and its relation to the theosophic, scientific, and philosophic mysteries. Possibly you may find these in your libraries. John Yarker. I'm quoting first of all from page 299. Mecca has been for ages a semi-Masonic society which claims its derivation from the Quraysh, a tribe, who were the guardians of the Kaaba, namely the Bani Ibrahim. The Bani means the sons of Ibrahim. For some hundreds of years, our constitutions have asserted that Nimrod was a grand master and gave the Masons a charge which we still follow. Its first degree is the builders of Babylon, and it is directed against Nimrod and his idols and against idolatry in general. Its second degree is the brothers of the pyramids and teaches, as also our constitutions, that Abraham taught the Egyptians geometry and the mode of building the pyramids. The third degree is the builders of the Kaaba, in which the three Grand Master Masons, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, erect the first Kaaba on the foundations of the temple erected by Seth on the plans of his father Adam. At the completion of the Kaaba, or the cube, the 12 chiefs or assistants of the three Grand Masters are created princes of Arabia. The society was clearly very ancient in AD 600, as Al-Quran, that is the Quran, alludes to the legendary basis on which it was formed. Now, before I give you the last quotation, I'll just deal briefly with this, what we refer to the creation of the 12 princes of Arabia. And you find a reflection of this in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 20. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. Some of you who might know something of the Shiite system, the Shiite branch of Islam, you know, they venerate the 12 Imams, and a quotation like this strongly gives them a basis for their particular doctrines. Now, we'll go on to John Yarker's second quotation, which is a little repetitive, but I'll give it to you all the same. These are on pages 183 and 184. He says, I am aware of what I have never yet seen mentioned by any Masonic writer, that amongst the Muslims throughout the world, there is a very ancient secret society which claims to derive from the Quraysh, or the guardians of the Kaaba, who were a superior Arab race and the descendants of Ishmael, and of which Muhammad was a scion. In the first and second degrees of the system, precisely the same assertions are made as in the MS constitutions of Masonry, whilst the third degree is devoted to the erection of the Kaaba by Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac as the three presiding GMM. Sale, that is a Western author, in his preliminary observations in his translation of the Quran, gives a full account of the legend as to Abraham's erection of the square temple, similar to the one destroyed in the deluge, the plans of which were etherically let down from heaven on the prayer of Adam, the first humanity. I am inclined to give credit to the alleged great antiquity of these three degrees of the sons of Abraham for two reasons, or rather for three. In the first place, Muhammad himself confirms the basis of the legend in treating of Abraham. In the second place, the 13th century account of the erection of Salvation Mount, or the square temple of San Graal, the plans being similarly heavenly designed, is admittedly by the writer himself taken from Muslim sources. And in the third place, I believe Witt Ashmole, another Masonic scholar and writer, that the present system of Masonry was a 13th century reform of an older system. In 1872, the late Brother Mackenzie whose encyclopedia or cyclopedia of masonry is well known, organized the order of Ishmael of 36 degrees, the basis of which he informs me he had from an Arab in Paris. And in 1884, I was myself in relation with Prince Mustafa ben Ismail, ex-Prime Minister of Tunis, then in Paris. But Mackenzie's idea seems to have been that our biblical legends were transmissions of the order of Ishmael, of which the sons of Ibrahim or the sons of Abraham were a very ancient branch, or as he terms it, the oldest secret society in the world. There are phases in the evolution of our earth when you can say the times darken. The landmarks are obscured. Spirituality seems to diminish with the overwhelming materiality that besets man's mind, but the mysteries never fade and remain. They may go underground for long periods of time, so much so that there may be no evidence sometimes of them in the outer world. Also, the religions often embody these sacred signs and symbols, although the masses know nothing of it. They go on with their exoteric religions. No doubt, I'm sure they are nonetheless helped by it. But then a brighter age dawns again, and that which has been concealed is revealed once again. Thank you.